Past studies and clinical evidence has long suggested that the adjustment has an effect on brain function. This study set out to demonstrate that using EEG technology, measuring brain activity. Hi there, I'm Dr. Kevin Leach here with the Chiropractic Deep Dive podcast, bringing you the most important research and information on conservative primary spine care, upper cervical chiropractic care, and traditional chiropractic care. These research reviews, interviews, and episodes are made for you, whether you're a medical doctor, patient, or concerned family member or friend. The goal of these shows is to bring awareness of the importance of taking care of our spine and the impact it has on our health and the hundreds of different health conditions it could cause without us realizing it. I'm really trying to bring value with these, so I'd appreciate commenting on the videos, hitting the like button, and sharing them with as many people as you can. You never know who might need to see it. And consider subscribing to the channel so you can see all the other episodes and videos coming out. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your support. Now on to the show. Okay, welcome back everyone to the Upper Cervical Chiropractic Research Show. This is episode 21. I am Dr. Kevin Leach and I'm here with Dr. Tyler Evans. How are you, sir?
Hello.
All right, so this episode is titled Manipulation of Dysfunctional Spinal Joints Affects Sensorimotor Integration in the Prefrontal Cortex, a Brain Source Localization Study. And this is done by Dr. Heidi Haavik, which is, she's fairly popular in the profession here with a lot of the research that she's doing. And I will not try to pronounce the rest of the authors' names. My apologies, but we will definitely put that in the description for them to be recognized. And this was done in the journal Neural Plasticity. So that's pretty cool. So just a quick synopsis of the paper. The goal of the paper was to bring pretty much more awareness of what the chiropractic adjustment does to the brain, and specifically the prefrontal cortex. Past studies and clinical evidence has long suggested that the adjustment has an effect on brain function. This study set out to demonstrate that using EEG technology, measuring brain activity. Specifically, they used N30 somatosensory evoked potential, or SEP, peak amplitudes following the chiropractic adjustment and sham adjustments. Two major findings of the study were discussed, the first being a repeat of previous studies' observations of a decrease in the amplitude of the SEPs, and the second being that they were able to see that this was happening in the prefrontal cortex, to see that this was happening in the prefrontal cortex using dipole source localization, which apparently until recently that wasn't really available, so they weren't able to really pinpoint the location of where this was happening. Yeah, so Dr. Evans, what are your overall thoughts on the paper here?
Yeah, it's funny. When we talked earlier, we're like, oh yeah, we'll keep this one short. It's just, we'll try to make it easy and light. And I started thinking, and I'm like, holy cow, this paper has so much in it. And I don't want to get crazy on it, but Dr. Haavik is down at New Zealand College of Chiropractic. I knew of her doing research down there in 2008. And I think she was doing research before that. I think she's been there for a while, but she has been building a data bank of research where she started very basic, very simple, and she's been trying to show. So her family, one of her parents is from Sweden, I think. She lived in Sweden, she lives in New Zealand. Her family's from all over the world, basically. She ended up in New Zealand because the school had an opportunity for a research practitioner there and had some funds to fund her research. And I think her father or her grandfather was one of the first chiropractors in Australia or New Zealand. And they're very subluxation based people, like the grandfather and her, they very much promote the founding principles of chiropractic. And she, as a young practitioner, as a young doc in the field, wanted to show that subluxation exists but the problem is the model is so hard to prove because we're so stuck in the old language and all that. And so anyways, her whole thing was, you know, back in the day, we talked about bone go out of alignment, bone push on nerve, ugh, chiropractor push bone back, ugh, bone better, nerve better, right? And that's like totally not what happens. Maybe in some rare cases, right?
But you know, to give credit where credit's due, to explain it to patients in a very simple way, that's pretty much why it was used. I mean, it's very complicated why the chiropractic adjustment works. So to go into this with patients, it's just their eyes are going to glaze over.
Yeah, when we started in 1895, medicine was doing bloodletting and giving people mercury and, you know, basically poisoning people in 1895. And so, you know, for chiropractic to have this conservative approach where we're just adjusting the spine, and, you know, it's like that it ended up, they knew they got a result. Not BJ, DD Palmer adjusted a gentleman, Harvey Lillard, in 1895. He had a lump on his back. His hearing had gone 10 years prior. He couldn't hear much. Didi adjusted him on his back. His hearing got better. And Didi said, hey man, your nervous system was connected to that. I moved the bone, or we heard a pop, the bone moved, and your hearing got better. And so there must be a nervous system connection to what's happening here. So bones and nerves, move the bones and the nerves get better. That was very different from osteopathy, which was move any joint in the body, and we're trying to increase blood flow and circulation. And so, you know, it was a unique thing. He had a unique idea. It came from years of DD studying the body as you know, many different types of practitioners. So we got this very amazing tool and technique, and it was a very basic understanding in 1895. And over the years, we've developed it. And you can't make us wrong and bad for it. We've done science, and there are literally thousands and maybe millions, I don't know, of papers that have, you know, documented the case studies between Matt McCoy's published articles and all the stuff that's in PubMed of what chiropractic is able to accomplish. She's trying to show we're altering brain function, which is, that's it. Like in terms of you know, results and outcomes in care, changing the brain is where it's at. And, you know, it's great if somebody's sciatica gets better, but what's really amazing in this paper is that she showed that prefrontal cortex function changes, cortical function, which is the cortex, and specifically the prefrontal cortex, which is where judgment, thought, basically what makes us human, the part of our brain, you know, that makes us human. We're seeing alterations in that after corrections to the spine, and not even just the upper neck. Specifically, she adjusted the whole spine because she supports chiropractic and she supports subluxation based chiropractors. She's just doing it from an approach that gets the literature to say what we needed to say, that chiropractic changes the brain. So anyways, yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
You know, it's a good point to say that this is the upper cervical chiropractic research show, but this isn't necessarily an upper cervical technique that was done here. But since it's affecting the brain, and we know that upper cervical chiropractic affects the brain, we thought it would be really good to go over. Good. So tell us a little bit more about, you mentioned the prefrontal cortex, but how was that significant in this study, and why is it located to that area?
Well, the prefrontal cortex is an area that gets damaged very easily. And then we see changes in all kinds of systems throughout the body. So if we can make a change in the prefrontal cortex, what we know is that then it'll change most of the systems in the body, the immune system, cardiovascular system. If we go and look at what the prefrontal cortex does. Prefrontal cortex functions involve planning a person's response to complex and difficult problems. It's basically what makes us human. And when we alter that, your ability to be a better husband, to be a better wife, to be a better mother, to your kids, you know, that is what we're working on. We're working on mood, you know, sleep, all of that stuff. So it's really important that the prefrontal cortex is functioning properly. And, Heidi's building this case over 10, 15, 20 years of research that she's done to get to the stage where she could say this. And this was back in 2015. She's actually done some papers lately that build on this paper, and she's got some really cool studies that are coming after this. So,
Nice.
she's just showing that when we make an adjustment, when we correct a misalignment in the spine, it alters the function of the brain in a way that basically creates better health for the human frame.
That was going to be my next question here. So obviously, it showed that it alters the prefrontal cortex, number one. Number two, it's decreasing the amplitude, and there's a chart here as well that shows it. What is the beneficial effect? And I may need to just look into this a little bit further of the decrease of the amplitude.
I didn't want to jump into this too much, but meditation. So if you look at like Joe Dispenza's work, there's a book he wrote called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And it talks about the brain waves and how each of the lobes of our brain has a different wavelength. And there's alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon, I believe. But anyways, so you want those brain waves at a certain level, and you want them talking. You want all the different lobes talking to each other. And what happens is a lot of times the prefrontal cortex is one of the first ones to get injured and damaged in head and neck trauma. And so there are a couple of different ways you can moderate that. And what we've seen over the years is that meditation, Dispenza talks about it, and he talks about how meditating once a day for 10, 20, 30 minutes is really helpful. He says, you should do an hour a day, which is a lot, and I don't do that. But if you did 10 minutes a day, it brings those brain waves down to a more healthy state. And then neurofeedback is another way you can do that. It's called amplitude training, or high HPN, high performance training, I think. But it's those are all ways. So chiropractic is a way that we can get those brain waves into a more balanced state, into a more neurologically healthy state. And that's what all this kind of like languages about the different amplitudes and SN, all that stuff. That's just showing that the adjustments to the spine made changes in a way that brought in better neurology at that better level.
I've done a lot of reading with some other research on not necessarily upper cervical chiropractic, but what the chiropractic adjustment does as far as the mechanism of pain relief.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting. And Chestnut's work, Dr. Chestnut's work kind of goes into this as well in regards to if the joint doesn't have proper complete range of motion, then you're not going to get the effects of the negating effects of the nociceptive input and et cetera with pain. And so the chiropractic adjustment, restoring that complete range of motion, then allows those nerves to get through, and it inhibits the, nociception, pain, the pain signals in the body. That's for pain. I'm curious what physical manifestations, and they may be just pretty much what you just said, better clarity, better decision-making, thinking and planning, et cetera, from the prefrontal cortex. What would those real life benefits be from, decreasing that amplitude on the prefrontal cortex and either, potentially restoring normal brain wave activity?
Yeah, so prefrontal cortex, 9 functions of the prefrontal cortex: empathy, insight, response, flexibility, emotional regulation, body regulation, which is where I was talking about, like, temperature and breathing and heart rate and immune function, morality, intuition, attuned communication, and fear modulation. And what's really interesting is the limbic brain is tied in really strong to the prefrontal cortex. And that's like the fight or flight, freeze, stress response. And you know, that all kind of goes together. It's that autonomic system connected to the prefrontal cortex. So
you know what I just thought of, which is super interesting. I mean, you know, back in the day, BJ's days, and maybe even before that, they had the sanitarium, the clinic for mentally ill patients, and a lot of those patients saw improvement. And when you think about the list that you just read, and if chiropractic care had an effect on those, right? Like what happens when you have lack of empathy and lack of those things that you just said, like you start to get into mental illness, right? So it's really interesting to see the connection there.
Well, that was one of the reasons Heidi wanted to do the paper. I think, yeah, I don't want to say things I'm not sure about, but you know, many people have kind of hypothesized about why they emptied the Clearview Sanitarium. They emptied it out, literally emptied it out. They bought it because it was a failing monetary wise, like they didn't have enough money to run it. And BJ and the clinic, they absorbed it because it was close. It was there in Davenport, I believe. They bought it. They put in upper cervical tables, and that was it. They just had upper cervical care. It was toggle. I think it was HIO toggle care. And I believe Heath Quigley, Nip was his nickname, but Nip Quigley, he was Mabel Palmer's brother, I believe. And he was the guy that ran the clinic, and they emptied that clinic out, emptied it out. Got them all better.
It's awesome, man.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Dr. Chris Kent did a paper on it, just about kind of the history of it. I think it's titled Mental Health and Chiropractic Care, but yeah.
It's also interesting to see, to think about what head injuries potentially do to these mental, to these mental problems. When they say people get these concussions and then they change as people, it's like
they do. Phineas Gage, that whole thing, it's like they went right through his prefrontal. I mean, the guy was lucky to be alive, but it just destroyed his prefrontal cortex, and that's what gives you the ability to judge, how to act as a human and emotionally regulate. But yeah.
Interesting. All right, man.
What makes us human?
Yeah. Any other points for the paper?
I mean, it's like, it's a pretty simple, it's a very complicated paper, but to just get the gleaning point out of it is, that we see changes in the prefrontal cortex. And actually, Kevin, I will say this, something that I do we do in our practice is we rest people. And I found for myself, we do a little different technique than Dr. Leach. It's called Blair, and there's a little more force to it, just a slight bit more force to it. And I do better when I go from that position, getting adjusted and just resting for 20 minutes. I hold my adjustment really well. And I think a lot of that has to do with, if we're making changes in the prefrontal cortex, and there's a lot that has to do with gravity, but if you're making changes in the prefrontal cortex and it needs to alter and stick, then if you get up and you just go walk around and start talking and interact with your environment, you're running your prefrontal cortex you're getting it wound up, and you're not allowing it to integrate what just happened. And so that's one of the reasons I think resting people helps and let it integrate everything for 10-20 minutes. So
yeah,
anyways,
probably one of many different ways that it's
many pieces of it. Cool.
All right, you ready for your fun question?
Here we go.
So the fun question for Dr. Evans, or for everybody watching, is how many mountains has Dr. Evans climbed?
Oh,
physically, not mentally.
Okay. That's a good question. What I will say is over 14,000 feet, or we'll say over 10,000 feet. Mount Shasta in Northern California, Mount Adams in Southern Washington, Mount, what's the one in Oregon and Portland? Mount Hood, just outside of Portland, Oregon. I think that one's 12. And then Mount Rainier, that one's 14. And Yeah, mountain abs. So those 4 are the big ones that I've done. They're fun. It's still fun. I love.
Okay, so there's 4, but how many times have you done each?
Rainier 1 time, Mount Adams 1 time, Mount Hood 1 time, and Mount Shasta 1 time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was expecting more. I was expecting you to be like, oh, like 27, you know, no big deal.
A lot of smaller mountains, but not big ones like that.
Big.
Yeah.
Well, the question
Baker's
is mountains
on the list.
You know.
Yeah. I know.
Awesome. All right, Doc. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the next one.
Okay.
All right.
We'll see you soon.
Okay, that's it for this episode. So what did you learn that fascinated you or surprised you about the research today? Join or start the conversation in the comments below. Hey, thanks so much for watching. To watch more of our research shows, click or tap the screen right there. To subscribe to the channel, click or tap the screen right there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Kevin Leach with the Upper Cervical Chiropractic Research Show, bringing awareness to conservative primary spine care, upper cervical chiropractic care, and traditional chiropractic. Until next time, take care and take care of your spine. It's the only one you'll ever have.